A house divided against itself cannot stand. All that I see around me is threatening ruin. When I look to the future, I am hopeless. The mighty armies of the living and the dead are gathering against us. And I feel like a man possessed of a fevered dream who stands among the ruins of his garden in the wilderness, crying out for bread and meat. Oh, God, help my country. The year before, Abraham Lincoln had been elected the 16th President of the United States. Now he was preparing for his inauguration in March 1861 in Charleston, South Carolina. Preparations were underway for secession. A delegation from the Confederacy arrived at Fort Sumter to inform Major Robert Anderson that they demanded the fort's surrender. As dawn broke, Confederate forces opened fire. The next morning, Fort Sumter fell. The news spread throughout the northern states and reached President Lincoln in Springfield, Illinois. He sat down to write a letter to Congress announcing that he would dispatch vessels to aid the fort. While writing, he paused when he heard a knock at the door. It was his friend and advisor, William Hurden Huntley. "What shall I do?" asked Lincoln. "You must decide," said Hurden, "whether this nation shall live or die." The people of the northern states began to debate whether they should join the war. Many did not want to fight against their own relatives. Across the South, however, the will to fight was stronger. But now, which side would win? We don't know yet. As spring turned to summer, more southern states seceded. By July, 7 states had left the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. They chose Jefferson Davis, former senator and former Secretary of War, as their first president. As the new government organized itself, it began drafting an army. Soon, thousands of men were ready to march. On June, the two armies met in the first major battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Manassas or Bull Run. Both sides were confident they could win quickly. When word reached Richmond that the rebels had won the battle, the citizens celebrated in the streets. But President Davis knew the war would be long and hard. Meanwhile, President Lincoln called for 500,000 volunteers to fight for the Union. Although many African Americans wanted to join the Union Army, they were not allowed. Meanwhile, the Confederates were marching north. At the end of August, two armies met in western Maryland near the town of Sharpsburg. This battle was one of the bloodiest of the war. By nightfall, 23,000 soldiers lay dead or wounded. General George McClellan had hoped to capture the rebel capital of Richmond, but he was forced to retreat south to Washington, D.C. The defeat at Sharpsburg encouraged both sides to keep fighting. By the winter of 1862, many soldiers suffered from exposure, disease, and hunger. Some died and others deserted. President Lincoln offered them a way out by granting them amnesty and giving them a small pension. Yet many Northerners still hesitated to enter the war. Lincoln needed a victory to show them that the war was worth fighting. In January, General Ulysses Grant captured the city of Fort Donelson in Tennessee. 2 weeks later, General Winfield Scott captured Atlanta in Mexico. These victories proved to be the turning point of the war. More Northerners joined the Union Army. Among them were many African Americans. In 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg took place over a small town in Pennsylvania. It would become one of the most important battles of the war. On the first day of the battle, the Confederates drove the Union troops back to the town. That night, the Union commander, General George Meade, set up his headquarters at the nearby farmhouse of Colonel John Hay and his wife. During the night, a thunderstorm raged. As lightning flashed, revealing the faces of the colonel and his wife, Lincoln came upon them and exclaimed, "Is this the place? Is this the house?" Mrs. Gage invited him in. The president slept in their parlor. When he woke, he walked alone through the battlefield. Seeing so much death and destruction, he told the colonel, "I have seen a great deal of death during the last 3 years, but I have never seen anything like this." Later, the president visited the home of the widow Bixby, where he tenderly cradled her baby while she stood by weeping. Then he went to the cemetery, where he spoke to the crowd gathered there. Lincoln told them that those who fought at Gettysburg had consecrated it. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. After the battle, President Lincoln announced to Congress that he intended to issue an Emancipation Proclamation. His advisors urged him to wait until the Union Army scored another major victory. In September, General Sherman's troops captured the city of Atlanta. The president waited a few more months to make sure that the victory at Gettysburg would not be forgotten. On New Year's Day 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that all slaves in areas of rebellion should be freed. Many African Americans who had been enslaved for generations learned to read as they fled to freedom. They risked everything to escape. Some traveled hundreds of miles on foot to reach the nearest jail. Others, dressed as sailors, stowed away on ships bound for the North. The Civil War would rage for 2 more years. On July 1864, General William T. Sherman led an army of 60,000 soldiers on a march through Georgia. After burning Atlanta to the ground, Sherman and his troops marched to the sea. By February 1865, Savannah had fallen. News of the fall of Savannah reached the president just as he was about to leave Washington, D.C., for the annual presidential inauguration in Richmond, Virginia. Confederate President Jefferson Davis planned to capture the president and take him to the South. However, Lincoln's train arrived too early for the scheduled capture. Davis ordered his troops to pursue the president's train. At this time, General Ulysses Grant was pursuing Confederate forces. When Davis heard that Grant had caught up with his troops, he ordered them to stop pursuing the president's train and engage the Union Army. Instead, Jefferson Davis, along with his wife, Varina, and several others escaped to a tobacco warehouse where they hid for 2 days. Meanwhile, fighting continued across the South. On April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. Only a few weeks later, Confederate General Joseph Johnston surrendered his army to General Sherman. The war was finally over. President Lincoln was determined to bring the nation together again. He worked to ensure that the rights of African Americans would be protected. Unfortunately, Lincoln's life would not be spared. On April 14, 1865, President Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater with his wife, General Grant, and his wife, and 2 friends. A man named Lincoln S. Booth snuck into the president's box and shot Lincoln in the back of the head. The president was taken to a house across the street where he died the next morning. 5 days later, Lincoln's body lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda. People from all over the nation came to pay tribute to their president. Everyone who saw his body reported that it looked as though he were alive. He was then taken to his final resting place at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois. There, his body lay in state in a specially constructed tomb. Over the course of the 4 days, 70,000 people paid their respects to him. Many left flowers, coins, and even locks of their own hair. The American Civil War had been the greatest conflict in the history of the United States. More than 620,000 soldiers died. Most of them died not from battle, but from diseases like typhoid fever, pneumonia, and dysentery. Slavery was abolished and the United States was reunited. But racial prejudice would continue for decades to come. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and leave a comment below to let me know what other historical events you'd like to see brought to life.